I never thought the HOA would care what I did in my own driveway, especially inside my own car. I wasn't causing trouble. I wasn't making noise. I was just trying to figure things out after a rough patch. But the next thing I knew, there was a bright orange notice taped to my window, accusing me of residential misuse of a vehicle. They claimed I was violating HOA policy just by sleeping in my car, on my own property. I get it. Rules are rules. But what happens when those rules don't leave room for real life? Stick around because this one got personal fast. And if you like true HOA drama with a twist, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happened next. It was just one night. That's what I kept telling myself. One night in the car, in my own driveway, with the engine off and the neighborhood as quiet as ever. I wasn't out there partying. I wasn't blasting music. And I sure as hell wasn't trying to stir up trouble. I was just trying to make it through the night. The truth? Things had been rough lately. Personal stuff I won't get too deep into. But if you've ever had a family argument so heated that you just needed space, even if it meant sleeping in your car, then you'll get it. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't living in the car full time. I just needed air, distance, a reset. So I grabbed a pillow, tossed a blanket over the passenger seat, and crashed for the night. Nothing illegal. No one complained. No noise. No mess. No problem. Or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up early, still groggy from a night of half-sleep and cricks in my neck. The sun hadn't even fully come up yet. I stretched, stepped out of the car, and immediately noticed something flapping on my windshield, an HOA violation notice. At first, I actually thought it was just one of those community flyers. You know, the ones about yard sales or neighborhood potlucks. But no, this was official. Red ink, bold print, and a tone that made it sound like I'd committed some kind of crime. Improper residential use of a vehicle, observed sleeping, inside a parked car overnight, subject to fines and possible enforcement action. My stomach dropped. I wasn't camped out on the sidewalk. I wasn't pulled over on the street. I was parked in my own driveway, on my own property. I looked around in disbelief, half expecting someone from the board to pop out of the bushes with a clipboard. Now, I'm not the kind of person who picks fights with the HOA. I keep my lawn trimmed, my garbage cans tucked away, and I even repainted my shutters last year just because they suggested a more unified aesthetic. I play by the rules, but this felt personal, and the timing couldn't have been worse. I was still dealing with everything that had pushed me into the car in the first place, and now suddenly I was being threatened with a fine just for trying to cope. Part of me wanted to laugh it off. Just a misunderstanding, right? Maybe someone saw me in the car and assumed the worst. Maybe if I just explained, they'd understand. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about one night. This was about control. A few of the board members had always been a little too enthusiastic about their authority. One of them, Mr. Gaines, the vice president, had this way of circling the neighborhood in his golf cart like he was patrolling a military base. He once knocked on my door because my recycling bin had blown over during a storm. So yeah, I had a feeling he was behind this. Still, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. I folded the notice, went inside, and figured I'd bring it up calmly at the next HOA meeting. Maybe if I approached it respectfully, they'd realize how absurd the whole thing was. But the more I thought about it, the more irritated I became. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Me, parked in my own driveway, sleeping quietly in my own vehicle. And somehow, that was a problem? Was I supposed to drive around aimlessly all night instead? Or pay for a hotel just to avoid being seen dozing off in front of my own house? And what exactly did residential misuse of a vehicle even mean? I pulled up the HOA's online portal, went straight to the bylaws, and started digging. The phrase wasn't even in the documents, at least not in those exact words. There was something vague about prolonged occupancy of non-dwelling units, but even that seemed like a stretch. How is one night considered prolonged? That's when it hit me. They weren't just enforcing the rules, they were interpreting them however they wanted, and if I didn't stand up for myself now, it wouldn't stop here. I decided I'd show up to the next meeting and call it out, but not with anger. Not with yelling or drama. I'd bring the facts, bring the context, and if they wanted to quote policy at me, I'd have the receipts. The thing is, I get it. Some people do live in vehicles full time, and maybe the HOA doesn't want that becoming common in the neighborhood. But that wasn't me. I wasn't building a van conversion. I wasn't camping out long term. I just needed space for one single night. Still, this situation was turning into something bigger. It was about fairness, context, and how far an HOA can go when they start applying the rules without understanding the people behind them. By the time I folded that violation notice and slid it into my folder for the next meeting, I was no longer just defending my decision. I was standing up for the right to breathe in your own home, even if it's from the driver's seat. I walked into the HOA office the next day holding that violation notice like it was a summons from a bad dream. The place was dead quiet, with that over-air-conditioned chill you only get in buildings that take themselves too seriously. Behind the desk sat Marcia, the HOA's admin, receptionist, and unofficial gatekeeper. She's usually polite, but always gives off that vibe like she's ready to say no before you even ask anything. I placed the notice on the counter. "This was taped to my car," I said. "I just want to understand what rule I supposedly broke." She gave it a glance and sighed like she'd seen this 100 times. "If you were sleeping in your vehicle overnight, that's considered residential use of a non-dwelling unit. It's against Section 8.3.1 of the Neighborhood Covenant." I had that section printed out already, pulled it from my folder. It says here that no vehicle may be used as a permanent or semi-permanent residence on the property. I slept in my car one night. That's neither permanent nor semi-permanent. She paused, clearly not expecting me to have receipts. "You'd have to take that up with the board," she finally muttered. So I did. That week's HOA meeting was only 2 days away. I circled the date in red and showed up early, violation notice in hand. There were maybe a dozen other residents in attendance, most there for fence approvals or lawn disputes. I waited my turn while the board worked through a stack of mundane agenda items: sprinkler complaints, dog leash violations, and someone asking if Halloween decorations could stay up past November 1st. Finally, it was open comment time. I stepped up to the microphone, cleared my throat, and held up the notice. I received this violation for sleeping in my car overnight. One night, in my own driveway. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I wasn't living out of my car, and I'm not sure how that falls under any enforceable rule. The room went quiet. Mr. Gaines, the same guy who rides around in his HOA-branded golf cart like he's head of security, leaned forward and started flipping through a binder. "We received a report that a resident was spending the night in their vehicle," he said. "And as per our bylaws, using a vehicle for residential purposes is prohibited. It's about maintaining neighborhood standards." I took a breath. I understand that. But if I spent one night in my car to clear my head after a personal issue, that doesn't qualify as residential use. It's not a living situation. It's not ongoing. It was one night. A woman on the board, Ms. Chen, chimed in. "So, you're not living in the vehicle?" "Not even close," I replied. "I've got a house. I pay dues like everyone else. I've never received a single warning." "In the 5 years I've lived here," Mr. Gaines raised an eyebrow. "It's about perception. If someone thinks a car is being used as shelter, that sets a precedent." That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about optics. The board didn't care what was true. They cared what it looked like from the outside. One person sees someone asleep in a car and suddenly they imagine the neighborhood turning into a parking lot of campers and van lifers. But that wasn't happening. This was still just one person, one night, trying to get a little peace in their own space. I held up the violation notice again. "So let me ask, what exactly is the line between taking a nap in your car and living in it? Because people sit in their cars to take phone calls, people rest after long drives, people wait for their kids to get home from school." Ms. Chen seemed to soften a bit. "You're right. The language in that section is vague." Gaines wasn't budging. "If we allow exceptions, even once, it gets out of hand fast." "But it wasn't an exception," I replied. "There was nothing to permit. No ongoing behavior. No damage to the community. Just a bad night. And instead of compassion, or even a knock on the door, I got slapped with a violation." Silence again. One of my neighbors stood up, a guy I didn't even know that well. He lived a few houses down and mostly kept to himself. "I saw the car," he said. "I thought maybe you were just waiting for someone. Honestly, I wouldn't have even known if I hadn't walked past on my morning jog. I don't think it bothered anyone." That helped. After about 10 minutes of back and forth, the board said they'd review the context of the violation and discuss clarifying the language around vehicle residency. Which, let's be honest, was code for, we weren't expecting pushback. No fine was issued, at least not yet. The notice still stood for now. Pending review. As I left the meeting, a couple people patted me on the back. One guy said he once got a warning for storing gardening tools in his truck bed. Another woman rolled her eyes and said, "They act like this place is Beverly Hills." That's when it really hit me. These rules are supposed to serve the community, not punish people for being human. But the board? They were starting to blur that line. And if they were going to act like sleeping in a car was the same as turning it into a trailer home, I knew I had to go deeper. I wasn't trying to wage war. I wasn't trying to embarrass the board. But I wasn't going to let them turn my driveway into a crime scene over a blanket and a pillow. After the board meeting, I honestly thought things might settle down. The warning hadn't turned into a fine, yet. And a few members on the board seemed like they were willing to listen. I figured maybe someone would reach out, ask for a little clarification, or maybe just chalk it up to a misunderstanding and move on. But that's not what happened. Instead, 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail, formal, stamped, and printed on HOA letterhead. I opened it thinking maybe it was a follow-up to our discussion. It wasn't. It was an escalation notice. Apparently because I hadn't formally disputed the violation in writing, the board assumed I was accepting responsibility. The letter stated that if the issue wasn't resolved within 7 days, I would be fined $150 for the infraction, and possibly face further penalties for non-compliance. I stared at the paper, stunned. Had we not just spent 15 minutes at the last meeting discussing how the language in the rule was vague? Had I not explained the context clearly? I wasn't ignoring anything. I'd spoken up, publicly, respectfully, and now they were doubling down. So I wrote an email to the HOA directly. I kept it calm, polite, but firm. As discussed at the recent HOA meeting, I do not believe this violation accurately reflects what occurred. I spent one night in my vehicle, in my own driveway, during a personal emergency. I am not living in my car, nor have I violated any policy in a prolonged or intentional manner. I respectfully ask that this violation be withdrawn, and that the board consider revising the unclear language in the bylaw in question. I clicked send and waited. 3 days later, I received a reply. Not from Marcia, not from Ms. Chen, but from Gaines himself. Dear homeowner, while we appreciate your engagement with the community and your attendance at the recent meeting, the policy in question is still in effect as written. Regardless of intention, the overnight use of a vehicle for personal residence is not permitted under Section 8.31. The board cannot make exceptions to policy based on individual circumstances. There it was. Not a single word about context. Not even an ounce of understanding. Just a cold, hard quote of a bylaw, and an assertion that individual circumstances don't matter. That was the moment it became real for me. The HOA wasn't trying to understand. They were trying to make an example. To them, this was about order, not fairness. So I decided to try one last time to reason with them. Not through emails, not through policy talk, but one-on-one. I caught Ms. Chen a few days later when she was walking her dog. She seemed like the only reasonable one on the board, and I figured if anyone might see both sides, it was her. We talked for a while, just walking along the sidewalk. I explained again. Same story, no exaggerations. I told her I wasn't asking for special treatment. I wasn't trying to bend the rules, I just wanted to be treated like a human being, not a policy violation. She listened, quietly. Then she said something I didn't expect. I get where you're coming from, and honestly, I agree. The policy isn't clear, but Gaines is pushing hard to enforce everything strictly this year. He thinks being lenient leads to chaos. Chaos? We're talking about someone sleeping in their car once, not turning their driveway into a junkyard, not throwing parties or blocking traffic. One quiet night, and suddenly it's a threat to the neighborhood's image. Ms. Chen said she'd bring it up with the board again, try to get the language clarified. But I could tell she was being careful. She didn't want to cross Gaines either. That's the thing about HOA boards. Power, even the tiny kind, goes straight to the head if no one checks it. Still, I appreciated her honesty, but I also realized I needed to stop asking for compassion. It wasn't going to come from them. Instead, I started looking at the policy again. This time, not as a resident defending himself, but like a lawyer looking for loopholes. And you know what? There were a lot of gray areas. For one, the bylaw didn't define residential use. Not clearly. It didn't say how long was too long, or how many nights crossed the line. It didn't distinguish between someone living in a car and someone resting in one. On top of that, the rule never stated where on the property this applied. Technically, my driveway isn't part of the HOA's communal space. It's on my deed. Private property. The HOA governs aesthetics and compliance, sure. But living on your own land isn't something they can easily enforce, especially without clear proof. And they had no proof. Just an assumption. So I drafted a formal response, this time citing specific passages in their own documentation. I included a copy of the bylaws, highlighted where the vagueness lay, and attached a short statement explaining that I had not agreed to the violation and was actively disputing it. I sent it certified mail. If they wanted to play the policy game, I was going to play it better. Meanwhile, I started getting support from other neighbors. Word had gotten around, probably thanks to that board meeting, and a few people came up to me just to say they were shocked I got flagged for something so minor. One woman even said her son used to nap in his car during exam week, and if someone tried to fine him, she'd raise hell. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about precedent. Because if they could twist the rules this easily to hit me, what was stopping them from doing the same to someone else next? What if a neighbor sat in his car to listen to music? Or someone had to sleep in their car during a renovation? Or a teen fell asleep waiting for a friend to get home? Would that be a fine too? This wasn't about sleeping in a car. This was about control dressed up as concern, and if they were going to quote bylaws at me without listening to context, then I was going to bring the full rulebook to their doorstep, because they weren't the only ones who could interpret policy. At this point, I wasn't just frustrated, I was determined. The HOA clearly wasn't interested in resolving things like reasonable people. They were hanging their entire argument on an interpretation of a vague rule, and they thought quoting it enough times would make it stick. They were betting that I'd eventually just give in and pay the fine to make it go away. But they underestimated two things. 1, I can be stubborn too. And 2, I don't like bullies in khakis. So I decided to test the waters again. But this time, I wasn't doing it blind. I was going to collect my own evidence. I parked in the same exact spot in my driveway on a Friday night. This time, I didn't actually sleep in the car, but I did set up a dash cam and a GoPro inside. The angle was wide enough to show the entire front seat and dashboard. I even ran a time-stamped screen overlay just to keep everything clear. I also put a printed sign on the dashboard that said, "Not sleeping in vehicle, testing camera system, homeowner." Then I went inside and slept in my actual bed. Next morning, I retrieved the footage. 10 hours of nothing. No movement inside the car, no lights, no signs of anyone using it for anything other than sitting idle in a driveway. Just a car, parked on private property. Later that day, I went out to get groceries and, what do you know, another notice was on my windshield. Different wording this time, though. It was labeled an observation warning and said the HOA had reason to believe the homeowner may be repeating a prior violation. They didn't even try to confirm anything. No knock, no email. No attempt to verify what was happening. Just an assumption. Again, that's when I got serious. I scanned the footage and compiled a short 2-minute clip of the time-stamped overnight video. Then I added some written context. Just a few bullet points on the screen explaining the setup and that I was conducting a test. I emailed it to the HOA board with the subject line, "Proof of non-violation." Again. Within the hour, I got a reply, from Marcia, not Gaines. "Thank you for your clarification. The board will review your materials and respond shortly. That response felt different, less robotic, like someone behind the scenes was starting to realize they were picking the wrong fight. Still, I wasn't done. The next week, I parked in my driveway again. But this time I just sat in the car for an hour around 9 p.m. I made a few phone calls, answered emails on my tablet, and listened to music. I didn't recline the seat. I didn't use a blanket. I didn't do anything that could possibly be interpreted as sleeping. And I recorded the whole thing again. Sure enough, 2 days later, another letter. This one stated that the behavior may constitute a pattern of residential vehicle use, and that further actions could result in escalated enforcement. I read that twice. They were escalating based on sitting in a parked car for an hour. At this point, I knew I wasn't just dealing with bureaucracy, I was dealing with control. Someone on that board, and I didn't have to guess who, was obsessed with asserting power through the flimsiest excuse possible. So, I made a decision. I printed out everything. The original violation notice, my certified dispute letter, the camera, footage stills, the timestamps, the warning letters, and even a highlighted copy of the bylaw in question. I put it all in a binder, color-coded, tabbed, and bulletproof. Then I submitted it as an official agenda item for the next HOA meeting. Motion to clarify Section 8.3.1 regarding vehicle use. Now they couldn't ignore it. They had to discuss it. That night at the meeting, I came prepared with copies for every board member. I stood in front of the room, not as someone defending myself anymore, but as someone advocating for everyone who's ever been hit with a ridiculous notice and just quietly paid it. This is what happens, I said, when you take vague language and apply it without understanding or context. What started as a personal moment in my own driveway has turned into weeks of warnings, assumptions, and borderline harassment. I've provided evidence. I've followed procedure. But at no point has the HOA actually tried to understand the situation, only enforce their version of it. I looked over at Gaines. His jaw was tight. Ms. Chen, on the other hand, was nodding slightly. I continued. I'm not here to undermine the rules. I'm here to ask that we apply them fairly, clearly, and with room for humanity. If we're going to claim to be a community, then we need to act like one. The room was quiet. For once, people were really listening. Gaines tried to argue, of course. He brought up property values, precedents, and the infamous slippery slope. But he didn't have much to stand on. Not when I documented everything. Not when my offense had turned into proof of just how flawed the rule really was. When it came time to vote on revisiting the language in the bylaw, 3 of the 5 board members raised their hands. That was enough. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a start. The rule was going to be reviewed, rewritten, and discussed in the next quarter's policy review. That meant no fine, no violation, and hopefully, fewer ridiculous warnings for others in the future. As I left the meeting, I had 3 neighbors stop me on the way out. One said, "About time someone stood up to them." Another whispered, "Next time they come for my bird bath, I'm calling you." And the third just gave me a smile and a quiet, "Thank you." A few weeks after the board meeting, the HOA newsletter came out. I opened it expecting to see a section about policy reviews, or even a note on community engagement, something that acknowledged what had gone down. After all, the issue of vehicle use and unclear bylaws had sparked one of the more engaged meetings in recent memory. But nothing. No mention of Section 8.3.1. No reference to rule revisions, not even a generic "thank you to homeowners for your input." It was like it had all been scrubbed clean from the community narrative. I wasn't surprised, really. After all the energy Gaines had poured into proving he was right, I guess admitting they'd gotten it wrong, publicly, was a bridge too far. Instead, they chose the easiest path. Pretend it never happened. But the community hadn't forgotten. A few days later, I was walking my trash bins back up the driveway when a neighbor I didn't even know that well slowed his car, rolled down the window and said, "Hey man, appreciate what you did. You stood your ground." That happened more than once. People started waving more when I walked the block. Someone even left a handwritten note on my porch that just said, "We're lucky to have neighbors like you." Ironically, the same car that almost got me fined? It became a bit of a symbol on the street, like a quiet little act of resistance parked in plain sight. But here's the real kicker. A few weeks after the board agreed to review the vehicle policy, I noticed Gaines hadn't been attending meetings. At first, I thought maybe he was just skipping one, but then another went by, and another. Eventually, someone told me, off the record, that he'd stepped back from board duties for health reasons. That might have been true, but part of me wondered if it was just his version of an exit strategy that didn't require admitting defeat. Either way, with Gaines out, Ms. Chen and another new member took the lead on rewriting the policy. They actually invited homeowners to participate in a working group. I joined, and to my surprise, so did a few others. The group included a retiree, a single mom, and even a guy who'd once gotten fined for having the wrong shade of mulch. It became clear that everyone had a story. Everyone had a run-in, and everyone wanted change. They just didn't want to be the first one to speak up. So we rewrote Section 8.3.1. It went from a rigid, vague sentence about residential vehicle use to a clearly worded section that defined what counted as long-term habitation, included exceptions for emergencies, and, most importantly, emphasized homeowner communication before enforcement. No more surprise warnings, no more blanket assumptions, and finally the words "intent matters." That was the biggest win. When the new bylaw was put to a vote, it passed easily. Not a single board member opposed it. That moment was satisfying, but what came after it was even more surprising. A couple months later, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I braced myself out of habit, but when I opened it, I realized it wasn't a warning. It was a thank you. Dear homeowner, on behalf of the HOA board, we'd like to thank you for your patience, your advocacy, and your role in improving the community bylaws. Your commitment to respectful dialogue and procedural clarity helped us create a more transparent and fair policy. We recognize that the original interpretation of Section 8.3.1 did not reflect the values of the neighborhood, and we are grateful for your involvement. No signature from Gaines, of course, but Ms. Chen had signed it, and that honestly felt more real. After that, life just moved on. No more warnings, no more tension, just the usual day-to-day rhythm of the neighborhood. Sprinklers, porch lights, dogs barking at squirrels. The kind of quiet that you only really appreciate after someone tries to mess it up over a technicality. One night, just for fun, I sat in my car again. I brought a book, left the interior light on, and even kept the windows cracked. I stayed there for an hour, just reading in peace. No one bothered me. No one peered through their blinds. No warnings showed up the next day. It was just me, parked on my own property, finally left alone. That one ridiculous fine attempt? It turned into a full policy change, into better neighbor relationships, into people feeling just a little more empowered to speak up next time the HOA tries to stretch a rule into a weapon. And the irony? All it took was a guy sleeping in his car for a single night. Funny how something so small can shift everything. I never set out to make noise. I just wanted a little grace. Instead, I got a glimpse into how thin the line is between community and control, and how easy it is for authority to forget the people behind the paperwork. But I also learned something else. People will back you up if you give them a reason to. Sometimes, it just takes one voice to remind everyone else they've got one too.